Thank you for having me. Again, Matthew Marrin, Division Administrator for the state of Minnesota. We also cover Ontario. Before I get started, I just want to preface, it's really important that you guys take this feedback back and send us any questions or issues or struggles that you're having. We want to answer and address all your questions, concerns, even your scenarios. So I've received a handful already just in the past week, a few more today, but our goal is to get your answers addressed as soon as we can. Also note that some of the issues that do come up, there may be some conflict. So we'll reach out to Washington, D.C., get some their opinion on what we should do, but I want to make sure that your issues are addressed. So I really want to start out with that and preface that. Today, I'm going to be sharing some information on the final rule, which came out June 1st. Let me back up here. It's a little fast on my end. So I was going to have part of the agenda is kind of go over the 4 changes, but if time permits, it doesn't sound like we'll have a whole lot of time. I was going to talk more about the emergency actions update. Another one came out today, the crash preventability determination program. I've been getting inundated with a lot of questions and a lot of situations from your members. And of course, the new entry-level driver training. If we don't get to all this, that's okay. I'm going to provide this presentation into a PDF, so you actually have this as a resource moving forward. So the goal is to ensure that Minnesota Trucking Association members are well informed of the final rule. My goal is to ensure that we respond with quality responses to any of your situations that come up, and that's our reason for actually presenting here today. So this came out, is published June 1st, 2020. The new rule updates of the hours of service regulations affected 4 key areas: short haul exemption, adverse driving conditions exception, 30-minute break requirement, which I've been getting a ton of calls, and of course, the sleeper berth provision, which again seems to have the biggest amount of questions coming up so far. Right now, Washington, D.C. is putting together a frequently asked questions for the sleeper berth just because there are so many questions related to it. Why did the hours of rules change? Well, the big thing is it was developed based on widespread input from motor carriers, drivers, carriers, advocates, Congress, and of course, the American public all wanted to contribute. We all know that truckers are essential for movement of all the goods across the country, and anything we can do to alleviate some of the pain is kind of the goal. The new rule aims to provide drivers with greater flexibility while maintaining a high level of standards on our roads. The biggest thing I think too for congressional opinion was it's going to save over nearly $3 million. It's always the money, right? So what about engaging our stakeholders? Well, FMCSA sought out input from all our stakeholders throughout the 2-year rulemaking process, which began in August of 2018. We actually made a proposed rulemaking which resulted in over 5,000 comments. Additionally, we did 5 public listening sessions, which I think you guys were all invited to attend. And then after that, we actually provided another notice of proposed rulemaking in August of 2019, which generated almost another 3,000 comments. With all these comments, each comment actually had to be addressed, recorded by not only one person, but by multiple people to validate the actual comment. So they actually pulled all our resources from around the country. So every division office at some level had to pony up an FTE to work on this to get it done in a timely manner. So of all this, through all these notice of proposed rulemaking, there actually was 5 changes presented, but only 4 made it through it. So let's talk about the 4 changes. Really, the big one was, where it started was a short haul exception. Really, to really nail this down, in the example on the slide, under the previous rule, the driver could travel within a radius of Peoria, Illinois, and was unable to service the area of the surrounding locations just because of the current process. Under the new rule, the driving radius is expanded to 150 air miles, which increases the location for the driver and allows them to service those areas with the additional 2 hours. Potentially adds flexibility, taking into account any waiting time and any other thing that the driver may experience during the route. However, it is important to remember that no additional driving time is being added and that drivers may not drive more than 11 hours within their 14-hour duty period. None of the other provisions of the CDL short haul exemption are changing. For example, maintaining time cards or the maximum driving limits for passenger and property carriers. Additionally, this does not change the non-CDL short haul exception in part 395.1, which is listed right there. So nothing changed at that level. Drivers and carriers using the short haul exception are not required to use a record of duty status or RODS or ELD or even take a 30-minute break. The extra time in the driving day has allowed always available to drivers if they opted out of the short haul exception. This change actually allows them to retain the status while receiving regulatory relief, which is what we wanted. Drivers who are on duty for more than 14 hours or that drive more than 150 air miles do not qualify for this exemption and must complete a log or use ELDs. FMCSA will still continue to use time records, time cards, as it does today in terms of doing a compliance investigation to ensure that short haul drivers are complying with the 11-hour maximum driving limit and other hours of service regulations for the 14-hour work shift. So when we go in there and do an investigation, we're still going to follow the same procedures. So here's the one been getting a lot of questions on as well. The adverse driving conditions exception. It was modified really to add the definition by modifying the definition to account for the driver's role in determining adverse conditions. The new adverse condition definition really means snow, ice, sleet, fog, and other adverse conditions, or basically road or traffic conditions that they were not known or could not have known of prior to their being dispatched. A driver immediately prior to beginning the duty shift or immediately before driving after a qualifying rest break or sleep birth period, or a motor carrier immediately prior to dispatching the driver. Basically, if they knew prior to being dispatched, that would not be part of the adverse driving condition. So it really hasn't been modified too much. Really what it comes down to is it gives that driver some more leeway as well, not just the motor carrier. For example, driving into poor weather that had been forecast on the route for days or hours prior to driving would not be eligible, nor would encountering rush hour traffic that is normally there. So if it's normal rush hour traffic, that would not be affected by this adverse driving conditions exception. So in adverse condition, a property carrier can still drive up to 13 hours within the 16-hour, and a passenger carrier can still drive for 12 hours within the 17-hour on-duty limit. This change will increase safety by allowing drivers more time when they are encountering driving conditions while en route prior or unforeseeable once they are dispatched. That is really the key here. In this example, a driver is 15 miles from the destination. There's a gravel spill on top of the, basically the top of the bridge. The only access is to the destination. The driver has 1 hour left to driving and 1 hour on his window for the driving day. The driver can stop at the next exit for up to 2 hours while the road is being cleared or opened or whatever the case may be. It still has time to reach the destination without violating the out of service rules. That is again the key. Remember, drivers should annotate and include any details about the adverse conditions on their ELDs. So let's say we do come in and do an audit and you are claiming the adverse condition exception, we would ask, hey, did your driver annotate it? And we would recommend that you do it. There's no must, it's a should, and I highly recommend that you do. Just in case, if we do come in and ask, it's already documented and it's there. So the 30-minute break requirement, this is the other one I've been getting a lot of calls on as well. It really changed the 30-minute driving break in 395.3. One, making the requirement applicable only when a driver has driven instead of having basically been on duty for a period of 8 hours without at least a consecutive 30-minute non-driving. Actually, I got to move this over a little bit. Sorry about that. There we go. The 30-minute non-driving interruption. So really, if I could stress any one thing, it's got to be 30 consecutive minutes. So I've been getting calls like, we do paper here for 20 minutes, and then we do paperwork over here, and then we unload, but nothing's ever basically consecutive. It has to be a consecutive 30-minute break. The other thing too, keep in mind that the changes in the 30-minute break requirement does not increase the maximum driving during that work shift or allowing driving after the 14th hour from beginning of the work shift. So it doesn't change that. The flexibility provided with this change will allow normal breaks from driving, for instance, from your daily task to satisfy the requirement, provided the rest break lasts at least 30 consecutive minutes. So what I've been telling drivers when they call me, if you're doing paperwork and it takes you 30 minutes or 25, do it to 30 and get your 30 in. Just don't break it up or it won't count in the future. For example, a driver could have 10 minutes of off-duty not driving, plus 10 minutes of sleeper berth not duty, plus 10 minutes of off-duty time to satisfy his or her 30-minute requirement, as long as 30 minutes consecutive. Short, non-consecutive periods cannot be combined to reach the 30 minutes of non-driving time. Also keep in mind, short-haul drivers are still exempt from this requirement. In the top log, the driver takes a 30-minute break off duty between 5 and 5:30, which meets the current requirements of both the previous and new out of service rule, as you can see. Under the new hours of service final rule, the bottom log, in which the driver took a 30-minute break, is also compliant. The previous rule does not allow on-duty, not driving to satisfy this break requirement. Also remember, just as I mentioned, short, non-consecutive periods cannot count combined to reach the 30-minute requirement. So, for example, you cannot take a 15-minute fuel break, drive for a couple hours, and then take another 15-minute off-duty break. It has to be consecutive. So anything out of here, it just must be consecutive. Sleeper berth. This is probably the most, across the country, the most challenging in terms of scenarios, what ifs. I've been getting them from all over the country. People asking me what's going on in Minnesota. How are you guys handling this? Because it's everywhere. So due to the sheer volume of questions we've been receiving from across the country, additional FAQs will be forthcoming from Washington, D.C. as soon as they put them all together. So if you have anything, let me know. If they're not straightforward, I'm going to pass them up so we can get them addressed in Washington. So FMCSA now allows a driver additional flexibility in taking 2 off-duty periods under the sleeper berth provision of 395.1. One period must be at least 7 consecutive hours spent in the sleeper berth, and the other period of at least 2 hours spent either in the sleeper berth or otherwise off-duty, as long as the periods total at least 10 hours. But when paired, either qualifying period counts against a 14-hour driver window prior to this final rule. Shorter period counted against the driving window. So, under the new hours of service rule, the 8-hour sleeper berth period by itself can no longer be excluded for the driving window. It must be paired with a qualifying break, meaning that no matter what you do, everything's got to be paired together to meet the 10 hours. And that's kind of the questions and how I've been addressing a lot of the questions I've been getting in a lot of scenarios. There's been just oodles of scenarios on this one. But again, as soon as I get them, I'll pass them out. This slide shows how a driver could split the 10-hour off-duty requirement into time periods in a sleeper berth and a 3-hour off-duty or 8 hours of sleeper berth and 2 hours off-duty. Bear in mind, you can split this time in a multitude of different ways, as long as both periods together combine to at least 10 hours and each period meets the respective requirements. As I mentioned earlier, due to the sheer volume, these scenarios, FMCs will be putting together some additional FAQs, which I'll pass on to the MTA membership. So I've already received some questions from MTA members, so let's walk through them. So when a driver is waiting at a repair facility in the driver lounge, are they on duty, not driving, or off duty? Nothing has changed here. If the driver is relieved of all responsibility by the employer and is free to pursue any activity of their choosing, it is considered off duty. Question 2, based on the new sleeper berth split rule, can you take a 7 and 3 and 8 and 2? I think this means any of those time frames will stop, pause the 14-hour clock. If the driver takes 2 hours off, will this pause this? So this example is provided by the member. If a driver takes a 2-hour off, will this pause 14 hours? If so, he takes 10 hours off at the end of the day instead of the 8 in the sleeper. He should regain his full 14 and 11. Does this mean that a driver can basically take a 2 to 3 hour break any day and period in his 14, then take 10 hours off and start over? Any qualifying break pauses the 14-hour clock. In order for the breaks to be qualifying, one must be at least 7 hours in the sleeper berth, not off-duty as an example states, and be paired with another break, off-duty sleeper combination, to a total of at least 10 hours. So I set that back to the individual, so I think we got that one squared away. The other question that came up as well, for the split sleeper, I believe both portions will stop the 14-hour clock. However, let's say a driver has 2 stints or more, 2 hours, and they do not decide which portion is not counted toward the duty time, or is it just automatically the first one that meets the criteria. Then he provided, or she provided, an example. If 2 breaks are potentially qualifying, the stint that benefits the driver the most will be honored. That's kind of how we are approaching this. Finally, or the fourth one, I think there's one more after this. Will yard moves also count towards a 30-minute break? Yard moves are on duty, not driving status, and therefore qualify for the 30-minute break. That's probably the #1 question I get. Question 5. Can an individual use the 7-3 or 8-2 end-to-end, or whether a 10-hour break is required after using the rest break split sleeper? A driver can use the split sleeper option back-to-back as long as each of the periods are qualifying. That's kind of how we've been answering a lot of those questions. Again, there's so many scenarios. Please send them to me and we'll sort through them. Let me check on my time, about 5 minutes. Okay, so what, in the end, what's taking effect? So everything is taking effect on September 29th. Drivers and carriers must operate under the hours of service final rule starting on this date, but not before. Those drivers that operate actually before or prior will be subject to violations roadside for not using the existing hours of service regulations. So everything goes into effect on September 29th, not before. Roadside will affect you. So again, here's my contact information, my phone, email. Typically what we try to do is get responses back within 24 hours to you, one way or another. So feel free to call me anytime. So I'm not sure how we're doing on time.
Tell you what, Matt, you've got some time because we,
okay.
You know, we're going to go till 4. We're going to have a 15-minute breakout. So you got a good 10 minutes.
Okay. So let me go a couple of the other stuff that's going on. As you probably saw today that came out, there was another extension that goes into effect August 15th. If you haven't read it yet, just so you know, they did reinstate the relief of emergency restocking of food, paper products, and other groceries. I get a lot of emails on this one too. People were asking what this means, and really what it meant was that individuals went to basically their congressional representatives and asked for that to be put in. So in this next round, it is back in there. I highly recommend that you read the whole thing just so you're aware of some of the changes in there. But that is the big one that's in there. And again, that goes through September 14th. Some of the other things I get to regarding these questions, people ask me about direct assistance all the time in support of emergency relief. Really, if you can articulate it and explain how it directly is in support of it, roadside is pretty flexible in that. But if you don't know, ask. I'm sure if we talk with Captain Olson at the State Patrol, he would also feel free to chime in as well on what that means for roadside. Here's some of the things I get asked a lot too. What is not covered by the declaration? Routine commercial deliveries. If you're doing them all the time to the same grocery store, they wouldn't be applicable. But if you need to add new drivers, additional routes, or more deliveries to that particular one, because you normally only do 2, now you're doing 5 deliveries, that would be part of the declaration at that point. So make sure you read that portion of it as well. Just so I get this too, carriers are still required to comply with all of the following. Folks think that they're exempt from everything, and they're not. I really want to stress that, because after they get stopped roadside, their first call is to our office. Other considerations of the declarations, I don't know if people really knew this, but if you're operating under the declaration, you have got to notify the division office if you're in an accident or a crash. And so I added this in there just in case you need to submit anything to us. This is our general office email box. And so we do maintain that all the time. I mean, in real time. So if you got anything, feel free to send it. Again, I'll make this PowerPoint available to MTA, so you guys don't have to write all this down. You'll have it all with you. I also get a lot of calls lately on carriers asking me, what about I can't get in for a medical exam? There are some that are doing it. There are some that not, but you still have the waiver until September 30th. If the current trend is going as we're seeing today, we'll probably extend this one as well, but for now, it is still September 30th. Just to kind of go back to that one, we are actually working with Driver and Vehicle Services with the Department of Public Safety to figure out how we can kind of fast track some of the skills tests, knowledge tests for carriers, especially when they're trying to recruit them. So just so you know, there's a huge track of folks working on that as well. This just talks about the medical waiver again, and they're still valid if they were issued prior to. So if they do expire, DVS, the STLA is very accommodating to work through those issues. If you need assistance or help or how to path your way through that, give me a call and I'll navigate it for you. Here's a question we get every week. This is again coming from Washington, D.C. They're asking us, every state, every division office, tell me about your rest stops. Is there anything impeding movement of commercial motor vehicles? The biggest one is keep the rest stops open. There's parts around the country where they're not. So far in Minnesota, we're doing quite well on some of these. So no issues here in Minnesota, but again, they're asking us every week on the status of rest stops, anything impeding traffic. And for us bordering Canada, anything impeding us coming in, going through Canada as well. So if you experience anything, I did talk to John Houselot about this last week, and it seems like there's nothing happening, but if anything does come up, let me know and we can again get involved. Crash preventability. This is probably number 2 on my list of phone calls and situations. The biggest thing out there is that the crash must occur on or after August 1st, 2019 to be eligible. The crash must be in our system. Typically it's through an inspection or some other way to get into our system. There's multiple ways to get in, but the other one is if they're not in our system, we don't know about it. Just quickly on the program, it's a 3-tiered program. We have outside contractors who actually review the initial crash. We have industry involved who actually look at it as well. And finally, the 3rd tier is FMCSA before they make a determination. So it's just not one person, one guy looking at it. It's a whole host of people looking at it. Training provider registry for entry-level driver training. Just so you know, the compliance date is still going to be February of next year, 2022. And right now we're actually working, spending a lot of time with the SDLAs around the country, getting their systems ready to accept all these. So just so you know, there's a lot of work being done on the entry-level driver. This is basically so when you're used to the medical registry and that kind of stuff, it's going to be similar to that, and that's what we're developing right now. So there's a lot of work being done currently on that, even during COVID. I put this out there so you have the information. If you're ever dealing with our portal systems, whether it's a clearinghouse for access, compliance hotline, we get a lot of complaints here, but we actually have to have them go to our complaint line. So here's some information if you need to file a complaint or if you need to point something in that direction. Here's some good, useful phone numbers. Again, here's my contact information should you need it, and I'll end it there. And I know it's a lot of material to grasp, but I'll give you the document.
All right, great, thanks.